Debra Shushan, thank you so much for coming here, talking to us, Voice of America Persian Service. We are very glad you're here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you, Kambiz.
So let's get to it. You work for J Street, and you are the director of policy. Is it safe to assume that most of the dominant news about Israel and what's happening in Israel is very lenient to the right side of the political spectrum, but what you do in J Street is more like a lenient to the left, or could we even call it progressive view on what's happening in Israel? Is that a safe assumption?
So thanks for the question, Kambiz. Maybe a good way to start is for me to give a little bit of an introduction about J Street. It's a pretty new organization in the landscape here in Washington, D.C. It's about 16 years old. And the folks who founded J Street back at the inception understood that the prominent Jewish organizations that represented or purported to represent Jewish Americans here in Washington, D.C. were not actually representative of the Jewish community on the issue of Israel and more broadly speaking. As I'm sure you know, living here in the United States, the Jewish American community is largely very progressive. It's a major constituency that has historically supported the Democratic Party, that favors progressive policies on many issues, domestic and foreign. And so there was a feeling that there was a real need for a different voice within the Jewish community that would actually be more representative of where the Jewish community is, including on Israel. An organization that would be both pro-Israel, as the Jewish American community is, but maybe have a different understanding of what it means to be pro-Israel, that also includes, when appropriate, criticizing positions of the Israeli government, especially when it's a right-wing government. But the organization would not only be pro-Israel, but pro-peace, understanding that ultimately peace for Israel with its neighbors, especially the Palestinians, is in Israel's interest. And so J Street was founded in order to provide political backing for a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with the hope, as President Obama was coming into office, that there would be a major push, and with the understanding that it would be necessary to have a major voice within the Jewish American community to provide support for that position. And so yes, I mean, I think folks, your listeners may be accustomed to a slant regarding news about Israel, the stance of the Jewish American community, that is not really representative and doesn't really paint an accurate picture of where the Jewish American community is on the issue. And that's what, and J Street has sought for 16 years now to fill that very important role, along with other organizations, other groups that follow a similar line with us on these issues.
Okay, great. It's good because it means that we have other spectrum to talk to and
exactly.
and view the things from the other side of the spectrum. Let me start with this because I think when we talk about Israel and Israel's safety and security, Iran and Islamic Republic of Iran is one of the main components that it's always talked or debated. And we are in election year in the United States, so it's also safe to do some evaluation and criticism. How do you evaluate Joe Biden's foreign policy vis-a-vis Islamic Republic of Iran? If they had outcomes, if they had whether there were failures?
Well, I think we have to go back a little bit first to the previous administrations, right? I mean, the Obama administration, in which obviously Joe Biden was vice president, one of its key diplomatic achievements, of course, was the JCPOA, or the Iran nuclear deal, which is something, and we can talk about this a little bit later if you like, that J Street played a major role in supporting and is very proud at having done that. Very successful agreement that, much to our dismay and with really devastating results, President Trump decided to abrogate the U.S. role in that agreement in 2018, which was a tremendous mistake, and we at J Street were very clear about that at the time. And so certainly going into the Biden administration, we very much were hoping to see a return, the United States rejoining the JCPOA. That's something that we certainly pushed for. And I know that it's something that the Biden administration very much wanted to happen. We saw that in terms of the Biden administration's appointment of Rob Malley, an extremely serious diplomat, as special envoy who was committed to a diplomatic process that would attempt to, if possible, bring back the JCPOA. Now, unfortunately, we know that that didn't happen. Our understanding was that there was a pretty narrow window in which that was likely to happen before the Iranian elections, while President Rouhani was still president, a reformist president who favored the JCPOA, whose legacy in some ways depended on that. And so we were really counseling and pushing for a strong push. And I think, there was there were obstacles on the Iranian side. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. And, unfortunately, my sense, not being an expert on Iranian domestic politics, is that was not helpful to Rouhani in the presidential elections that occurred. Obviously, he was defeated by a hardliner in President Raisi, which was an unfortunate development. And, very obviously, we have understandably, a even further dramatic crisis in Iran's relations with the United States and with other Western countries, both vis-a-vis the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas, one of Iran's allies in the region, with the escalation of Iran's nuclear program. And so we are obviously at a very bad place right now. That is in part a result of the failed policy of maximum pressure, which unfortunately hasn't been able to be reversed. And so, now we look forward to what can possibly happen next, how we can turn this around.
Okay, I think the main consensus is since this election year, if in January 2025 there's a Republican administration in the White House, probably we see return of maximum pressure or some kind of a policy next to that. But if it's a second term of Biden administration, what would you think they would pursue? Do you think there would be adjustment changes to their Iran policy, or do you think that's the same course that they were going to take it?
Yeah. So let's start with this. To be very clear, J Street, my organization, is strongly supportive of the Democratic ticket going into the 2024 elections. It is crucial that the Democrats win on November 5th, both in terms of foreign policy, Israel policy, which is the chief issue on which J Street engages, but in terms of the future of American democracy. It's just absolutely crucial, and J Street is supporting the Democratic ticket in every way possible, including raising large amounts of money to support it. It will be catastrophic across many areas of policy if former President Trump, a convicted felon, does return to office. And that's something that, first of all, let's just be clear that Americans need to do everything possible and Jewish Americans are broadly committed, with the exception of a small minority, doing everything possible to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't return to the White House. If he does, I think you're right. I think, unfortunately, the Republicans seem not to have learned the obvious lessons to the rest of us about the failure of maximum pressure, which has gotten us to where we are right now. And I think we can expect a continuation of that. In the event that Democrats return to office in January 2024, which must be the case, then I do hope that there can be a path, a diplomatic path back that can ultimately secure a return to, probably not the JCPOA. The consensus among experts is that the JCPOA as it was is dead and is not going to be resuscitated. But it is necessary ultimately that we move forward in that diplomatic direction. It is certainly necessary vis-a-vis the dramatic acceleration in the Iranian nuclear program. But I think, looking at the scene diplomatically within Iran, there is some reason for hope. It surprised many people, as I understand it, many veteran Iran experts, that the reformist candidate Masoud Pezeshkian prevailed in the recent election, and he's someone who, obviously in terms of Iranian domestic politics, is an anti-corruption, campaigned against corruption, campaigned against the crackdown on Iranian protesters and the Women Life Freedom movement, which we strongly support, certainly. And someone who also favors diplomacy and in the JCPOA and would like to see the crippling sanctions that are wreaking havoc and detrimental to the Iranian economy, would like to see those diminished. And so, I think it's important that there be a path forward for those kind of voices in Iran, which are now, will be in office in terms of the presidency. And so that's certainly something that we would like to see. To be clear, do I see any breakthroughs happening, prior to November, to the election, in this heated political environment? No. But as you said, what we need to be doing is looking forward to January 2025 and what could happen then.
You talked about JS3 support of the JCPOA, President Obama, also what President Biden wanted to do. I wanted you to open this for us. Is it safe to say that JCPOA had at least some support from Israel as well? Because we remember Prime Minister Netanyahu came to the Capitol Hill and gave a speech against it, or so. Also, post JCPOA signing, all the against talking points against JCPOA was that we left Israel outside, or we didn't support Israel. That was not the case. So, according to you, because it's safe to assume that JCPOA had support of Israel, just to confirm and go through.
Yeah, it's a really great question. And look, I think for years, particularly under the Netanyahu government in Israel, we have seen a divide between what we might call the political echelon, Netanyahu, and those around him in the Likud and other right-wing parties. Obviously, there are those in his current government who tack substantially even to the right of him, including Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir. You have the political echelon, the right-wing political echelon, on the one hand, taking the positions that it takes for political reasons, right, for domestic political consumption. And on the other hand, there is the veteran security establishment, which is often at odds with the political echelon. And I think, just to give a more recent example that pertains specifically to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, just the other day we had a major speech by the commander of Israel's Central Command, which oversees the West Bank, Israeli operations, the IDF operations in the West Bank. He was retiring from that position and being replaced, and he gave a major speech in which he was extremely critical of the settler movement, of settler violence in the West Bank, and of the failure of the government, the Netanyahu administration, to curb it. That's just, the most recent example, public example, of differences between, again, the right-wing political echelon on the one hand and the security establishment on the other, who have Israel's security, obviously, who are charged with safeguarding Israel's security. And usually you only hear the security establishment kind of speak out once folks have retired and are able to, to speak their minds publicly, right? So as far as the JCPOA, if we rewind a little bit, it was absolutely true in the build-up to the agreement, even as you had Prime Minister Netanyahu rather outrageously speaking to the Congress before an Israeli election, for his own domestic political purposes, speaking against President Obama and the JCPOA. At the same time, there were absolutely key figures within the Israeli security establishment, former senior security officials who maybe didn't think the JCPOA was perfect, and no agreement ever is, right? That's, it's always a, coming together of key parties in which compromises have to be made, but who still realized that an agreement that could credibly put Iran's nuclear program in a box was in Israel's security interest. And that's where J Street came in back in, the lead up to 2015. And the attempt to make sure that Congress would not scuttle an agreement that President Obama was able to secure. And so one of the things that J Street did in terms of our advocacy work on Capitol Hill was to bring senior figures from the Israeli security establishment, retired senior officials, to the United States and take them to speak directly to members of Congress and have them explain to those members of Congress, listen, you're hearing one thing from the political echelon, but we are telling you, as those who have been charged with safeguarding Israel's security, that actually this agreement on balance is in Israel's security interest. And I think ultimately that was very impactful and part of the process by which J Street was able to help secure the JCPOA, make sure that it would not be scuttled in the Senate.
I don't want to generalize. I think it's impossible, but is it safe to assume that, as you said, mentioned, officials in security of Israel, they're bound to some kind of a privacy. They cannot talk about this, but when they come out, they talk. Do you think, is it safe to assume most of them, when they come outside the government, are mostly lenient to your side of the political spectrum, rather than the Likud or the right?
Within the government?
No, yeah.
Within the government or the security establishment?
The security establishment.
Look, I don't want to characterize the balance one way or the other, but there have been and there continue to be key voices. And look, one of the organizations that I would point to that your viewers are, many of your viewers are probably not aware of, is an organization of, hundreds of retired senior security officials called Commanders for Israel's Security. And their positions regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the absolute necessity of a two-state solution, I think, is very much worth looking at in terms of understanding where the security establishment is.
I don't want to characterize it, but for example, some departments in the United States, historically, they are more right-leaning or left-leaning or so. So is it safe to assume most of the security apparatus are leaning to the left side of the spectrum, of the political spectrum?
I don't know that. I mean, I don't think these officials would think of themselves as, necessarily leaning to the left, but their chief interest is in Israel's security, and they understand that ultimately a two-state solution, a diplomatic agreement with the Palestinians, and indeed diplomacy also with Iran is ultimately in Israel's interest.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I went through this report that you done on Iran, how to deal with them, and there are like key recommendations here. The first one I wanted to talk to you about it. It says maintain proactive diplomacy on prisoner release. I think hostage taking is one of the industries that Islamic Republic perfected for more than 40 years now. Do you think pursuing this in somehow encourages that kind of behavior instead of either stopping it or through? So, or if someone says, if you do that, we are encouraging hostage taking, what would be the best response that you would say?
So, the United States, of course, one of the most solemn responsibilities that the President of the United States has is to safeguard the security of American citizens and to try to secure the release of those who have been taken hostage, who are prisoners. And so the Biden administration obviously was doing all that it could to try to secure the release of Iranian Americans who had been taken prisoner by the regime. They were negotiating a path to doing that that would free up Iran's own frozen funds in order to secure the release of these individuals. And that, I think, could have been a very important entryway to moving forward with diplomacy in other spheres, in particular the nuclear file, and potentially others as well. Obviously, Iran engages in, very clearly, a lot of malign behavior beyond just the nuclear file, and we see that in terms of its support of terrorist proxy groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, etc., through the region. And so, we saw that. This is a report that we produced back in spring of 2023. Saw that as a key way of moving forward, and that's something that would, on balance, be a very important entryway into diplomacy, as well as, obviously the good of securing the freedom of these individuals as a key benefit in its own right.
Okay. Let me ask you this, because, Israeli politics is a little bit tricky because the country is under attack constantly for years now. So security is the main part of it. And you're very, your organization are very progressive, pacifist, pro-diplomacy. I wanted to ask you if attack on October 7th caused you any recalculation or revision of your policies and your pursuits?
So it's a great question. One thing that I would do is I would not use the word pacifist to support J Street. We are certainly pro-diplomacy. There's no question about that. We also recognize that that military means are also an important tool in the toolbox that do sometimes need to be used. Certainly, in the wake of the horrific October 7th attack by Hamas, there was no question. I mean, we were very clear that the Israeli government had a right and a responsibility to use force to defend its citizens and made very clear that it had to do so in compliance with international law and also with U.S. laws vis-a-vis the use of U.S. provided weaponry. So we were very clear about all of that. Has October 7th and the aftermath led us to fundamentally recalculate? I would say the answer is no. And let me explain why. October 7th and its aftermath, I think, dramatically illustrates the failure of years of policy and the inability to reach a political solution between Israel and the Palestinians that would provide for freedom and self-determination for the Palestinian people and security for the citizens of Israel. In the absence of that, you see the growth of radical terrorist organizations like Hamas, right? Because there's no alternative. Because the PLO and the Palestinian Authority that have for years embraced diplomacy and a two-state solution and recognized the state of Israel have gotten exactly nowhere, right? And so for that reason, for that failure, and other reasons like corruption, like its crackdown on Palestinian civil society, which is indefensible, just to be very clear, but as it has gotten nowhere, it has nothing to show for the Oslo Agreement and the years of peace processing. Of course, it is going to fall into disrepute. Moderates, the moderate course, diplomacy is going to fall into disrepute, and you're going to see a rise in popularity of those who advocate armed struggle. And unfortunately, that plays a key role in getting us where we are today. And so, you know, as far as we are concerned, October 7th and the horrific morass that has followed, the war that has followed for 9 months, that has done nothing to advance the cause of Israel's security, while obviously being, you know, absolutely devastating to Palestinian civilians in Gaza, while we see the situation worsen even further at the same time in the West Bank with settler violence and the policies that are being pursued by Netanyahu and Smotrich, it is more clear than ever that we cannot continue on this path. And so what we at J Street have been advocating, you know, prior to October 7th and post October 7th is the need to harness the dynamic of normalization, Israeli normalization with Arab states. Obviously, that normalization had preceded the Biden administration, and President Biden has tried to carry it forward. Unfortunately, the way that it was pursued by former President Trump was normalization as a path to freezing out the Palestinians and try to negate the Palestinian issue. I think we see that that was a mistake. And what we have really encouraged the Biden administration to do is to move boldly toward a comprehensive regional security arrangement that would fully integrate Israel into the Middle East, full normalization with the Arab world, including Saudi Arabia. And part of that process, a key part of that process, would be the establishment of a Palestinian state and a path by the U.S. to recognizing Palestinian statehood. That was something that we advocated before October 7th, and something that we think is even more important now.
I'm sure we can talk hours. These are very deep issues, and it's great to have conversation with you. You somehow answered my last question as well, because I wanted to ask you about Abraham Accords, but you replied that we're running out of time. I thank you so much for your being here and talking to us.
Kambiz, thank you for having me.